All right, old-timer. Here's your shot at the big leagues. The voice belonged to Preston Whitfield Calder III, and it carried the particular music of a man who has never once in his life been told that he was not the most interesting person in the room. He was 44 years old, and dressed in the way that very wealthy men dress when they want to appear casual. A linen shirt the color of seafoam that had cost more than most people's car payments. Dark trousers with a crease so precise it looked architectural. Shoes that were Italian and matte and quietly devastating. He stood at the center of the covered veranda of the Magnolia Club in Savannah, Georgia, where the ceiling fans turned slowly and the evening light came off the river in sheets of hammered copper. And he held in his extended hand a single piece of paper folded in thirds. The man he was holding it toward did not look up from his glass. His name was Walter Roy Breckenridge, and he was 83 years old. He was sitting in a rattan chair near the railing with a glass of sweet tea that had gone warm and a copy of a paperback novel that he had been reading with the same focused patience that he applied to most things, which was to say completely and without hurry. He wore a short-sleeved shirt the color of old moss, khaki trousers that had been washed so many times the fabric had achieved a particular softness, and brown leather shoes that were clean and very well made, and had been resoled at least twice. There was nothing about him that announced anything. He was the kind of man that a room full of people would look past on their way to finding someone who looked important. His hands rested on the arms of the chair. They were large hands, the knuckles prominent, and the skin brown from decades of outdoor light, mapped with the fine lines of a life that had involved a great deal of use. They did not move. They were the hands of a man who has been still for a very long time and found it entirely sufficient. "You hearing me?" Calder said, stepping closer, the paper still extended. "I've got a document here that 3 different language consultants at my firm couldn't parse. Vietnamese and something else, something regional. Dialect, maybe. Nobody on my staff can read it, and I've got a deal closing Tuesday that depends on knowing exactly what it says." He paused, surveying Walter with the frank appraisal of a man accustomed to appraising things for their utility. "Someone told me you spent time over there. In the war. I figured it was worth asking, seeing as you're already taking up space on my veranda." The word "my" landed with the particular weight of a man who owns the building he is standing in and considers the distinction important. Walter Breckenridge turned a page of his book. Around them, the veranda held perhaps 20 people. Members of the club, guests of members, 2 young associates from Calder's firm who had followed him out from the main dining room still holding their cocktail glasses, a pair of retired couples playing cards at the far table, and a bartender named Jerome who had been working this club for 16 years and who was watching the exchange from behind the bar with the practiced neutrality of a man who had seen a great many things go sideways on this veranda and knew which ones required intervention and which ones required patience. "I heard you," Walter said. His voice was low and even, the texture of gravel on a dry road. He finished the page and set the book face down on the arm of the chair. Then he looked up. His eyes were pale blue, the color of sky at high altitude where the air is thin and the light is unmediated, and they held the kind of depth that is difficult to look at directly, not sharp, not cold exactly, but possessing a quality of accumulated seeing, the way a very old river looks calm because it has carved its channel over centuries and has nothing left to prove about its direction. He looked at Calder for 3 full seconds without speaking. "What kind of deal?" he said. Calder blinked. It was not the response he had prepared for. He recovered smoothly. Men like Calder always recover smoothly. It is one of the things they practice. And smiled. "The kind where knowing what this says makes me richer and not knowing costs me." He waggled the paper slightly. "Come on." Give it a look. If you can tell me what it says, I'll write you a check right now. $5,000. Cash it tonight. That's more than generous for 10 minutes of an old man's time. One of the associates behind him, the younger one, a woman in her late 20s named Kristen, who had been with the firm for 18 months and had spent most of them trying to determine where the line was between Calder's confidence and his cruelty, shifted. Her weight slightly. She glanced at the other associate. He looked at his cocktail. Calder held the paper out farther, as if proximity would compel. $5,000, he repeated, louder now, turning slightly toward the card tables to make sure his audience was getting the full benefit of his generosity. For 10 minutes of reading. That's the offer. Unless the war was a long time ago and the memory's going, in which case, no offense. He smiled when he said it. The smile was large and practiced and did not reach his eyes. Walter Breckenridge looked at the paper. He did not take it. He looked at it in Calder's hand, the way a man looks at something from a distance when he is deciding whether it deserves his attention. And then he said, very quietly, "Put it on the table." Calder hesitated, not from reluctance but from the mild surprise of being directed, and then he set the paper on the small side table between them, smoothing it open with 2 fingers. Walter looked at it for perhaps 4 seconds. His expression did not change. He looked back at the river. "I can read it," he said. "Well?" Calder spread his hands. "Let's hear it." "That's not the part you need to worry about," Walter said. The sentence sat in the air of the veranda for a moment. Calder's smile recalibrated. Around him, the conversations that had drifted within earshot had not resumed. "I'm sorry?" Calder said. Walter's eyes came back from the river and found Calder's with the same absence of hurry. "The language is Hmong," he said. "Central dialect, Highland inflection. Not Vietnamese. Whoever told you it was Vietnamese was reading the document heading and not the body." A pause. "The document is a land claim. 63 acres in Gia Province, registered in 1971 under a family name I'm not going to mispronounce for your entertainment." He looked at the paper once more. The claim was filed by a man named Vong Pao Com Di. The date on the notarization is March 14, 1971. There's a secondary notation in the margin in Vietnamese. Administrative. Means the filing was disputed by provincial authority, but not resolved. Calder was very still. The second paragraph, Walter continued, without picking up the paper, is a personal letter. Not a legal document. It's addressed to a son. It says the land was promised to the family in exchange for service rendered, and that the promise was made by Americans who did not come back to honor it. He stopped. Something shifted in his face, not grief exactly, but the proximity of it, the way a shadow passes across ground without touching it. It says the father held the land for as long as he could. It says he is sorry. It says he hopes the son will not be angry at the Americans, because some of them kept their word even when their country didn't. The veranda was entirely quiet. Calder's hand, which had been resting on the railing, had not moved for the last 30 seconds. Walter picked up his sweet tea and found it warm and set it back down. "The deal you're closing," he said, "involves that land." It was not a question. Calder found his voice. "How did you?" "Because nobody has a 63-acre GLI land dispute document for any other reason," Walter said. He looked at Calder steadily. "The family is selling. They're being compensated fairly. That's not what the letter says they were promised," Walter said. He said it without heat, without accusation, simply as a fact that existed independently of anyone's preference. "I'm not telling you what to do with that information." You asked me to translate the document. That's the translation. He picked up his novel. At the bar, Jerome had set down the glass he was polishing. He was looking at Walter Breckenridge with an expression that had traveled a considerable distance from professional neutrality. He was 51 years old, the son of a man who had served 2 tours in Vietnam and come home with very little to say about it. And he had grown up knowing that certain men carried certain things at a weight that did not show until someone disturbed the surface. He had been watching this exchange from the moment Calder unfolded the paper, and he had felt something building in the room the way you feel a change in barometric pressure before the sky gives any outward sign. He stepped from behind the bar, walked down the side hall to the club manager's office, and knocked twice before opening the door. The manager, a woman named Diane Okafor, who had spent 8 years as an Army JAG officer before leaving the service to raise her children, and had landed at the Magnolia Club 6 years ago because someone on the board knew someone, looked up from a budget spreadsheet. "Jerome, there's a man on the veranda named Walter Breckenridge," he said. "Preston Calder just tried to buy a translation out of him for $5,000. The man translated the whole document without touching it." Jerome paused, choosing words with the care of someone who understands they are carrying something fragile. "Miss Okafor." The document was Hmong, Central dialect. "I've been in this club 16 years. I've never heard a member translate Hmong off a paper they didn't pick up from 4 feet away, including the margin notations." Diane Okafor's expression did not change, but she had gone very still. "Walter Breckenridge," she said. "Yes, ma'am." She was quiet for 4 seconds. Then she opened her desk drawer and removed a small leather-bound directory that she had never had occasion to use before, and found the number she was looking for on the 3rd page. She picked up the desk phone. The man who answered was a retired brigadier general named Thomas A. Hurst, who served on the club's board of governors, who had spent 26 years in Army Special Forces, and 6 of them in the classified advisory program that had operated in Laos and the Vietnamese highlands in the late 1960s and early 1970s, and whose voice, when Diane said the name Walter Roy Breckenridge, changed completely, drained of all social register, and became something stripped and precise. The voice of a man suddenly returned to a frequency he had not used in years, but had never forgotten. "He's there," Hurst said. "Tonight? On the veranda. Someone is giving him trouble." The silence on the line lasted 5 full seconds. When the general spoke again, the words came measured and urgent and without ceremony. "Don't let anyone touch him. I'm 20 minutes away. Call Frank Duval and call Ray Costello and tell them the same thing. Tell them it's Breckenridge." A pause. "They'll understand." The line went quiet and then was simply gone. Diane Okafor set down the phone and looked at Jerome for a moment. "Go back to the bar," she said. "Watch. Don't let Calder escalate." She was already reaching for her cell phone with the other hand, and Jerome, whatever that man needs tonight, it's on the club. Back on the veranda, Calder had recovered enough of himself to perform recovery. He picked up the paper, refolded it, and placed it in his breast pocket with the deliberate care of a man who is buying himself a moment to think. When he turned back to Walter, his voice had the smooth, recovered quality of someone who has fallen and stood up before anyone was paying attention and has decided it didn't happen. "Impressive," he said. "Really, I'm not being facetious. That's genuinely impressive." He sat down in the chair across from Walter with the relaxed posture of someone claiming a room rather than entering it. "Where did you learn Hmong?" Walter turned a page. "The Highlands," he said. "Doing what?" "Working," Calder smiled. It was the smile of a man who has decided that a puzzle is interesting now that he has assigned it value. The CIA boys were up there in the 60s. My father knew some of them, corporate lawyers who did contract work for state. He used to say they were the most capable people he'd ever met. He paused. Were you CIA? Walter looked up from his book once more. His pale blue eyes held Calder's with the particular patience of a man who is not going to lie, but has not decided how much truth is warranted. No, he said. Special forces? Something like that. Calder nodded slowly, recalibrating the assessment he was making of the man across from him, not with any particular increase in warmth, but with the specific adjustment of someone who has realized they have been pricing an item incorrectly. Well, the offer stands. For the translation, I'm a man of my word. Walter was quiet for a moment. The river went on doing what rivers do. The ceiling fans made their slow revolutions. Keep it, Walter said. Give it to the family instead. Calder's smile thinned by a fraction. It's a real estate transaction. There's a price, and they've agreed to it. The letter says what they were promised, Walter said, simply, without heat. The price and the promise aren't the same number. He looked back at his book. That's the translation. Do with it what you want. The sound that came from the club's main entrance was not a siren. It was simply the sound of 3 car doors closing in rapid succession, close enough together that the sound was almost simultaneous, and then shoes on the club's wooden steps, measured steps, but covering distance. The screen door of the veranda opened, and Thomas Hurst came through it first, tall and close-cropped, and wearing a sport coat over an open-collar shirt, and carrying with him the quality of controlled motion that people carry when they have spent years where slowness had consequences. Behind him came Frank Duval, who had been a Navy SEAL in 2 wars and was now 71 and looked it only around the eyes, and behind Duval came Ray Costello, who had a silver mustache and wore a VFW pin on his lapel, and had driven here from a dinner party without changing his jacket or explaining to his wife what the call had said, only that it was Breckenridge and he was going. All 3 of them walked directly to Walter. Hurst stopped in front of him. He stood straight and looked at the 83-year-old man in the soft khaki trousers and the moss-green shirt, and the look on his face was not the social look of a man greeting a club acquaintance. It was the look of someone encountering something they had spent years being grateful existed and had not expected to find on a veranda in Savannah on a Thursday evening. He put out his hand. Walter took it. Walt, Hurst said. Tom, Walter said. They held the handshake for a moment longer than handshakes are usually held. Frank Duval put his hand on Walter's shoulder, briefly, the way men do when words are not the right instrument. Ray Costello pulled up a chair without being invited and sat down in the particular way of someone who is not leaving. Calder had not moved from his chair across the table. He was watching this with the expression of a man who has just discovered that the room he entered has a different floor plan than the one he believed he was navigating. Hurst looked at him. The look was not hostile. It was simply thorough. You're Preston Calder, Hurst said. I am. Calder extended his hand. Hurst shook it briefly. This man, Hurst said, with the particular precision of someone who is going to say a thing exactly once and does not intend to be misunderstood, is Walter Roy Breckenridge. He served in MACSOG from 1966 to 1972 in the Highlands Advisory Program, operating primarily in Laos and the Central Highlands with Hmong irregular forces under General Vang Pao. He was wounded 3 times. He holds the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, and 4 Bronze Stars with Valor. He speaks 4 languages fluently, including 2 Hmong dialects, because he spent 6 years fighting alongside the people who spoke them and understood that you do not ask men to die for a promise unless you are willing to learn their language first. He paused. After the program ended, When the United States withdrew and the evacuation failed and the Hmong were left behind, Walter Breckinridge spent 4 years of his own time and money attempting to locate and assist the families of the men his team had worked with. He found 11 of them. He helped 9 of them reach the United States. He does not talk about any of this. Hearst looked at Calder steadily. The family whose land is in that document you showed him, I would like to know how you came to have it. The veranda was very quiet. The river went on. The ceiling fans turned. Calder's hand moved to his breast pocket, where the folded document was, and then did not complete the motion. It was provided by the seller's representative, he said. His voice had undergone a change, not broken, not humble exactly, but careful in a new way. The way a man is careful when he realizes the conversation he believed he was having is not the conversation that has been happening. As part of the title documentation, "The Camdy family," Walter said, without looking up from his book. "Yes." Chow Camdy's youngest son is named Blong, Walter said. He was born in a refugee camp in Thailand in 1979. His father died in the Highland fighting in 1975, 3 years after we left. He turned a page. Blong came to the United States in 1983. He is 63 years old and lives in Fresno, California, and he has been trying to settle his father's land claim for 11 years. He looked up then, and his pale blue eyes found Calder's with the same depth, the same absence of heat or performance, the same quality of a river that has long since finished arguing with its banks. His father saved 4 men on my team in October 1970. He was 29 years old. He had a wife and 3 children, and 63 acres of highland farm, and the Americans had promised him it would still be there when the war was over. He was quiet for a moment. It wasn't. Calder sat with that for a long time. He looked at the breast pocket that held the document. He looked at the 3 men who had come through the screen door to stand near Walter Breckinridge. He looked at Jerome behind the bar, who had come back out and was not pretending to be doing anything else. He looked at Kristen, his associate, who was holding her cocktail glass in both hands and had the expression of someone who has just understood something that will reorganize the way she does her job. He looked at Walter. "What was his father's name?" he said. "Chow," Walter said. "We called him Charlie. He called us the Americans who stay. He picked up the warm sweet tea and put it back down again. We didn't." The formal consequences for Preston Calder arrived not on the veranda that night, but across the following weeks, in the form of a renegotiated transaction that his own associate Kristen, to her considerable professional credit, brought to him with a revised offer before he could proceed to closing. The Camdy family received an additional sum, not as charity, which Walter had made clear was not appropriate, but as a correction to the original offer, revalued against market comps that had somehow not made it into the initial appraisal. Calder signed it without producing the argument his counsel advised him he could make. It did not become, overnight, a different kind of man. That is not how men like Calder change. But he became a man who had been in a room with Walter Breckinridge on a Thursday evening in Savannah, and that specific fact altered the geography of how he understood certain transactions, and that alteration proved to be lasting in ways he would not have predicted and did not entirely understand. On a Saturday morning 6 weeks later, a hardware store 2 blocks from the Savannah riverfront was busy with weekend traffic when a man in a linen shirt, less expensive than the seafoam one, chosen more carefully, found himself in the same aisle as an old man in a moss-green shirt who was comparing grades of sandpaper with the focused deliberation of someone who intended to get it right. Calder stopped. Walter did not look up from the sandpaper. "Mr. Breckinridge," Calder said. "Preston," Walter said. A pause. The Camdy transaction closed. The revised terms. Another pause shorter. "I wanted you to know." Walter selected the sandpaper. He looked at it. He looked at Calder in the way that he had looked at him on the veranda, fully, without hurry, without any performance of judgment or its absence. Blanc called me, Walters said. He said the money was right. He placed the sandpaper in his basket. Said to thank the American who finally read the document. Calder stood there for a moment. The hardware store moved around them. Weekend traffic, registers, someone's child asking a question that went unanswered. I should have read it better the first time, he said. Walter looked at him once more. Most things people do wrong aren't from malice, he said. They're from not reading it carefully enough. He started down the aisle. Read it carefully enough. It tells you everything you need to know about who you're dealing with and what they're owed. He turned the corner and was gone. The quiet ones carry things we cannot see. The languages of people history abandoned. The names of men who kept the faith after their country didn't. The weight of promises that outlasted the wars that made them. We mistake their stillness for emptiness. We offer them money for 10 minutes of their wisdom, and do not know that what we are really asking is to borrow something that cost more than we have. When we are lucky, they tell us anyway. And when we are paying attention, we use it the right way. If you were moved by Walter's story of quiet courage and timeless wisdom, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to see it, and be sure to subscribe to Veterans Valor for more stories of America's unassuming heroes.